you'll notice, and again, anybody can do this. Anybody can do this as you take a look at the world around you. Again, going on the assumption that the geologic record has taken hundreds of millions of years to form. All right, let's put that to the test. As the layers are laid down, if you recall Steno's 4 principles, one of them was original horizontality. In other words, the layers were laid down horizontally. They're flat. Now, over hundreds of millions of years, well, even just within our time frame, we can actually watch, observe, and measure the land tilting, buckling, folding. All this is going on right before us. Just head down to California and take a look at things like the San Andreas Fault. You can see faulting and a fracturing of the land. So can you imagine amplifying that over millions of years? So over hundreds of millions of years, the land is going to tilt, buckle, fold, fault. It's going to do all kinds of stuff. So let's say it just tilts. Let's just go on that. Then, when the next layers come in, obviously, you're going to actually be able to see the tilt because the new layers are laid horizontally. And so at least one or more of those layers are actually going to be thicker on one end than the other. Do you follow me so far? Follow? Okay, good. Okay. It's kind of hard to get across, so hopefully you understand it. Now let's apply this to real life with a bit of math. Math is important, especially for you young guys back there. Okay? Trigonometry comes in surprisingly handy. Okay? Now, here we are in the Grand Canyon. Easily, anywhere in the Grand Canyon, you can see 10 miles or more left to right, easily. So when you look at the layers, you can see up to 10 miles in width or more, sometimes up to 15 or 18 miles, depending on where you are. It is just incredibly vast. But this does an excellent example for what I want to show you next. Assuming that these layers took hundreds of millions of years, I don't believe that for 1 second, but let's give them that for a second, we should see a difference in thickness in the layers from this side to this side. Makes sense, doesn't it? You should see a change somewhere. Instead, you see none at all. All of the layers are perfectly parallel to each other. That tells you essentially they were all laid down in a short amount of time. Now here's where the math comes in. Let's assume that the land tilted 1 degree. You'd be able to see it, but it's not much of a tilt. Within a 10-mile view, you've got a layer that's 10 mile wide. You've got a slope 52,800 feet long. There's 5,280 feet per mile, 10 miles. Your layer would be 921 feet thicker at one end than the other. Now, applying that to the Grand Canyon, one of the thickest formations in the Grand Canyon is the Redwall limestone. It's only about 500 feet thick. So as you stand on the north rim of the Grand Canyon and look out, the Redwall limestone should vanish within sight if the land had tilted a mere 1 degree during those supposed hundreds of millions of years. Obviously, it didn't tilt. I would argue this is evidence that it happened fast and did not take hundreds of millions of years. Again, at Joggins, same thing, only it's amplified. 18,000 vertical feet of layers have been laid down, and every single one of them is perfectly parallel to the last. For 18,000 feet. By the way, you remember Charles Lyell yesterday suggested perhaps the land could sink and water could wash in and deposit layers? You remember that? Some of you do. Okay, good. Some of you weren't here apparently, yeah? Okay, yeah, I'll leave it at that. Okay. Well, in this case, we've got 18,000 vertical feet. Wait a minute. If the land sinks 18,000 vertical feet, do you think that causes a flood? If the water went up 18,000 feet, does that not also cause a flood? How can you sink the land 18,000 feet without flooding the entire continent? Ain't going to happen. We are talking global catastrophe. It's nonsense to suggest that the land just sunk, and that was what caused the deposition of Joggins. Okay, I'm going to get a little technical on you. This is some more first-hand research I did. I presented a paper at the first Creation Geology Conference this past year on this subject. I'll be publishing later on it in more detail. This is a group of fossil polystrates, calamites. Now, yesterday I mentioned, just briefly, that as we take a look through the fossil record, Everything in the past was larger than it is today. Now, as an example, this is a plant. Some of you may recognize it already. It's called the horsetail. I don't know if anybody recognizes that or not. I don't have much left. But this is a horsetail, also known as the horsetail rush. The reason they called it a scouring rush is because it actually has a lot of calcite in it, and they used to use these for cleaning pots and pans in the olden days. So the scouring rush, again, still grows today. Today it might get 2-3 feet tall. But in the fossil record, this same plant got up to the height of 2 telephone poles. To give you an example, there's the modern version, and here is the fossil version. The difference in size is astronomical. What on earth happened here? And I'm going to get into that later on, trying to explain why everything has drastically reduced in size. Cattails, you've probably seen cattails. Bulrushes grow in swamps today. How tall do they get nowadays? Yeah, 4 or 5 feet, maybe 6. I've seen some 8 feet, but that's pretty rare. That same plant, again, up to 60 feet tall in the fossil record. Why? What on earth happened? Now, these fossil plants also tell a story. These fossil plants, when you find them at Joggins, are upright, as I showed you yesterday. They're buried vertically in the rock. This is a group of 10 of them. So every single one of those yellow arrows, they're actually foam tags that I actually pin into the rocks for photographs. Every single one of those arrows points to a polystrate calamites plant. Now, interestingly, these two right here were what caught my attention. I think I have a close-up of them. Yes, I do, right there. You'll please notice that they are actually, while they're polystrate, they bend and then come around in an arch. They are actually bent in unison in a counterclockwise ascending spiral. In fact, all 10 of them are. There's only one explanation for that, and that is that the layers, after they were all buried, the layers shifted relative to each other, and it bent the plants within them. Now, why on earth would it do that? Everyone agrees that all the Joggins cliffs, all the layers were deposited before the whole thing tilted on its side, and that's the only time the layers could have shifted relative to each other. So 18,000 feet of dirt piled on top of it, then shifted relative to each other. The plants were still green at that time. You think a plant's going to stay green for tens of millions of years? I don't think so. They were still green and flexible and buried in the dirt, and they got bent in unison. Another interesting point, please notice that it has got a vertical fracture in it. And if you look at the vertical fracture, it is also bent in a counterclockwise ascending spiral. A helix, if you will, a helical spiral. So if you're looking from the bottom, everything goes in this direction. Okay? So this is now, 1,000 feet below what I just showed you and about 2,000 feet away. So it's not like they're in the same layer. It's the whole formation is like this. The front has fallen off it, but take a look what's inside. Inside, there is a pithy core. It's something like a grapefruit. It's got a similar inside to the plant. Inside that, you know how a grapefruit has a core to it? Sort of right in the middle? Well, inside, that core, again, got bent in a counterclockwise ascending spiral. Everything in the Joggins formation somehow got twisted by the sedimentary layers shifting relative to each other. What on earth would do that? How can it do that? It makes no sense. In the exact same layer, here we are, only 30 feet away. You'll notice this one, fractured in a counterclockwise ascending spiral, fractured in a counterclockwise ascending spiral. If you lay them out, here they are, they're all in the exact same stratigraphic layer, about 50 feet apart, but they are all twisted and fractured in precisely the same way. This is obviously not the plants doing this. This is something else, the shifting of the sediments. But when you take a look at this one that I showed you yesterday, pay close attention to what the trunk does. It comes out and left, back and right, out and left, back and right, and then out again, coming in a counterclockwise ascending spiral. That branch, notice it's bent in a counterclockwise ascending spiral. The whole tree, 30 feet tall, is actually twisted into a big helical spiral. Now, over a 5-year study period, this is what I documented. I documented 102 polystrate plants. Of those, 43, there wasn't enough exposed, or it was so damaged you couldn't tell, or way up too high on the cliffs, whatever. 43 of those, I couldn't make any assessment. I couldn't tell if it was twisted or not. Of the remaining 59, 29 of those, or roughly half, about 50% of those, had a clear counterclockwise ascending helical spiral exhibited in them. Of those, a further 18 probably did, but again, there wasn't quite enough exposed or whatever. I had a reason for caution. If you include all of those, as much as 80% of the upright plants were all twisted in unison in a clockwise ascending spiral, or a counterclockwise ascending spiral. 10 of them had no spiraling, they were straight, and at least one had a counterclockwise ascending spiral. Or clockwise. There I go, I'm getting them mixed up again. Anyway. And 2 possibly did. Now here's what this all boils down to. Why did this happen? And the analogy will be making is towards tornadoes, because that's the only analogy I can make. Tornadoes and what we call colks, which are an underwater tornado, basically. You've probably seen colks. If you stand on the side of a fast-moving river, you can see the little tornadoes, the little funnels in the water. That's a colk. Okay, so similar analogy. This is the mid-oceanic ridge in the ocean. It is actually the longest mountain chain in the world, and we're going to talk about that mountain chain later on when I bring out this globe, and we're going to explain why the global flood happened. Actually show a mechanism for how it happened, and it's a fascinating study. But the mid-oceanic ridge, this gigantic mountain range, is also fractured left to right. And what happens is in the northern hemisphere, that fracture, you've got the range going like this and cracks going sideways, but the cracks are curved. In the northern hemisphere, they curve to the left. In the southern hemisphere, the crack curves to the right. And at the equator, it's disturbed. They go all directions at the equator as it rides along the equator for a long period of time. The explanation is quite obvious. This was in an article published by Jürgen Friedrich and Guy Leduc. The answer to this is obvious. It's the Coriolis effect. An article a few years ago on water gaps, it was just baffling. He said it's as if some of the water seeks obstacles to transect. It's as if the water took a turn specifically so it carved its way through a mountain. It's as if it looked for things to cut in half. It could have gone the easy way around the mountain, as any water normally would. Why would it do this? What on earth happened?